Trump's trade war is a political volcano ready to erupt. Vance once called Trump America's Hitler. Now he's his loyal sidekick while Hollywood steals the show. In 2025, the US-China trade war is more than an economic clash. It's a political volcano, erupting with Donald Trump's relentless tariff crusade and fueled by his loyal running mate J.D. Vance. This is a saga of power, hypocrisy, and razor-sharp satire, where the battlefield spans Washington's corridors and Hollywood's spotlight. Trump's rhetoric, framing China as the plunderer of American prosperity, revives his 2016 warnings, when Vance himself branded him unfit and compared him to America's Hitler. Now Vance, once the voice of the Rust Belt in hillbilly elegy, clings to Trump like a lifeline, his reversal exposing a crisis of political integrity. This isn't politics as usual. It's a high-stakes drama where loyalty trumps principle, and the stage is set for a global showdown. Vance's metamorphosis mirrors the MAGA movement's shift, from a rallying cry for the forgotten to a machine of blind allegiance. His book, meant to champion working-class struggles, is now derided as a hollow artifact, with Hollywood's George Clooney calling Trump unqualified, and in over his head, a leader floundering in a role too vast. Meryl Streep, a cinematic titan, delivers a devastating blow, condemning Trump's mockery of a disabled reporter as a heartbreaking betrayal of American decency. She recalls the moment Trump mimicked the reporter, a real-life act that shocked the world, leaving viewers asking, did he actually do that? Jimmy Kimmel's comedic arsenal cuts deeper, dismantling Trump's golden facade. Kimmel recounts peeing on Trump's Walk of Fame star, a symbolic act of defiance against a man whose chaotic leadership turns the White House into a circus. Kimmel's humor is more than laughs. It's a cultural revolt against a leader whose rage-filled tweets and erratic tariff policies, like a sudden 90-day pause, reveal a lack of strategic vision. Karoline Leavitt, Trump's spokesperson, flounders in this chaos, her press conferences riddled with contradictions. When questioned about deporting a U.S. citizen to El Salvador, she snaps, "Who does that judge work for?" A dismissive quip that betrays a disdain for judicial authority and erodes public trust. Yet despite the satire, 52% of Americans back new tariffs on China, with 74% of Republicans cheering Trump's defiance. But 74% also admit consumers bear the cost, a contradiction reflecting a nation torn between populist zeal and economic pain. This tension between Trump's larger-than-life persona and policy failures sets the stage for a global conflict, where Hollywood's wit amplifies the cracks in his armor and the world watches a political powder keg ready to ignite. Numbers reveal the trade war's brutal toll. Tariffs cost Americans $3,800 a year. China's thriving, yet factories are closing fast. To understand the US-China trade war, we must first grapple with the numbers, the cold, hard fuel of this economic maelstrom. In 2025, US tariffs on Chinese goods skyrocketed to 145%, a quantum leap from 19.3% in 2020, blanketing $335 billion in imports, from smartphones to sneakers. China has countered with 125% tariffs on US goods, up from 21%, zeroing in on agriculture, energy, and consumer products, sectors that bolster Trump's political base in states like Iowa and Texas. The World Trade Organization forecasts a 0.2% contraction in global merchandise trade for 2025, with a dire scenario of 1.5% if tensions escalate further. North American exports are projected to plummet by 12.6%, a crippling blow to farmers, manufacturers, and small businesses across the U.S. heartland. The human impact is visceral. American households are losing $3,800 in purchasing power annually, as tariffs drive relentless price surges. Food costs climb 2.8%, new cars average $4,000 more, and electronics face 12% price spikes due to snarled supply chains. In China, the economy, while resilient, is expected to contract by 0.6%, mirroring the U.S.'s own economic hit. China's trade surplus, at its highest since 2022, masks deepening pain in export hubs like Guangzhou and Shenzhen. where factories halt shipments, leaving tens of thousands of workers jobless. This isn't just a trade war, it's an economic earthquake, shaking the foundations of global commerce and testing the endurance of nations. The Yale Budget Lab projects that these tariffs could generate $2.4 trillion over a decade, but with $631 billion in negative revenue effects from reduced economic activity. A Pyrrhic victory at best. China's non-tariff barriers, like halting U.S. beef and LNG imports, add a stealthy layer of retaliation, targeting Trump's rural voters with surgical precision. The Peterson Institute warns that sustained tariffs could cost 1.2 million U.S. jobs by 2026, while China's export-driven coastal regions face parallel layoffs, with 200,000 jobs already lost in Guangdong alone, per China's National Bureau of Statistics. This is a high-stakes gamble, where every tariff hike risks billions in trade and millions of livelihoods, a chess match played with human futures. Beyond the balance sheets, the psychological toll is profound. In the U.S., retirees on fixed incomes fear stock market volatility, with the S&P 500 down 4% in Q1 2025 due to tariff uncertainty. In China, migrant workers face uncertain futures, their dreams of upward mobility stalled. The Brookings Institution notes that tariffs disproportionately harm low-income households, exacerbating inequality. Meanwhile, global supply chains are fraying. Semiconductor shortages have delayed U.S. car production by 18%, and China's rare earth restrictions threaten tech innovation. This tariff tempest is a crucible, forging new economic realities while exposing the fragility of global interdependence. The ripple effects are global. The WTO estimates that trade policy uncertainty could shave 0.8% off global trade growth, with $120 billion in export losses for developing nations. Gold prices have surged 30% as investors seek refuge, and the U.S. Treasury market faced its largest yield spike in decades after China hinted at offloading U.S. bonds. This is a war of attrition, where pride and power trump prosperity, and the world's economic scaffolding groans under the strain. China's outsmarting Trump's trade war tactics. They're choking U.S. tech with rare earth bans. Trump's tariffs seem tough, but China's building a new world order. Across the Pacific, China's Xi Jinping plays a master strategist's game, calm, resolute, and unrelenting. Beijing's 125% tariffs on U.S. goods target MAGA strongholds like agriculture and energy, slashing U.S. soybean exports by 22% and LNG shipments by 15%, per U.S. Department of Commerce data. Non-tariff barriers, like bureaucratic blocks on U.S. beef and LNG, strike with precision, undermining Trump's rural base. China's Commerce Ministry brands Trump's tariffs a mistake on top of a mistake, vowing to fight to the end. Unlike Trump, Xi faces no electoral pressures, granting him latitude to absorb economic pain without political fallout. China's trade surplus, at a 2022 peak, and 5.4% GDP growth in Q1 2025 signal resilience, even as tariffs threaten long-term export stability. Beijing's playbook is multifaceted and forward-looking. Export controls on rare earths, critical for tech and defense, aim to choke U.S. industries, with 30% of U.S. semiconductor production at risk, per the U.S. Department of Defense. A 1.3 trillion yuan fiscal stimulus is set to bolster domestic consumption, offsetting export losses and stabilizing China's middle class. China's new trade negotiator, Li Chenggang, a WTO veteran, signals a pivot to sophisticated diplomacy, contrasting Trump's impulsive threats. Analysts like Lily McElwee underscore China's technological self-reliance, with breakthroughs like DeepSeek's AI model and Huawei's 7-nanometer chip production positioning Beijing to outmaneuver U.S. sanctions. This isn't mere retaliation, it's a long-term strategy to outlast the U.S. in an economic war of attrition, where patience is China's sharpest blade. China's defiance extends beyond bilateral trade. By deepening ties with BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa, Beijing counters U.S. isolation tactics, with BRICS trade volumes up 14% since 2023. The Belt and Road Initiative, now spanning 150 countries, channels $1.2 trillion into infrastructure, securing China's influence in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The yuan's use in global trade has surged 4.3% since 2023, challenging the dollar's hegemony and signaling a shift in the global financial order. China's state-owned enterprises, like COSCO Shipping, have rerouted trade to ASEAN and Europe, mitigating tariff impacts. For example, Vietnam's exports to the US rose 18% in 2024, often as a transshipment hub for Chinese goods, per the US International Trade Commission. Xi's vision is clear: a multipolar world where China's economic might rivals and perhaps surpasses the US. While Trump's tariffs falter under their own weight, US import prices up 6.2% in Q1 2025. China's calculated moves signal a nation digging in for the long haul. This is a chess game where Beijing plays for decades, not election cycles, reshaping the global order while the US grapples with internal divisions. The trade war's shaking the entire globe. Even the EU's bowing to Trump's tariffs, but Japan's in crisis and Africa's losing billions. The US-China trade war is no two-player duel. It's a global tsunami, upending allies, adversaries, and bystanders alike. The European Union, once a vocal critic, has reluctantly embraced Trump's zero-tariff proposal, fearing economic collapse amid a 4.2% drop in EU exports to the US and China, per Eurostat. India seizes the opportunity, luring manufacturers from China with tax incentives, with $45 billion in new investments in 2024, per India's Ministry of Commerce. Brazil, stung by US steel tariffs, condemns the moves but hesitates to retaliate, wary of alienating Washington. Japan's stock market, battered by a 24% tariff, faces a national crisis, with the Nikkei plunging 15% in the first quarter of 2025, per the Tokyo Stock Exchange. The World Trade Organization warns that trade policy uncertainty could shave 1.5% off global trade growth, with least developed countries like Bangladesh and Cambodia facing $120 billion in export losses, per UNCTAD. Services trade, including freight and travel, is projected to grow by only 4% in 2025, a sharp decline from 9% in 2025-2024, per the World Trade Organization. Financial markets are in disarray. Gold prices have soared 30% as investors seek safe havens, and the U.S. Treasury market faced its largest weekly yield spike in decades after China signaled plans to offload U.S. bonds, potentially unloading $200 billion in holdings, per Bloomberg. Developing nations are collateral damage. African economies, reliant on Chinese infrastructure loans, face debt distress as trade slows, with $88.7 billion in repayments due in 2025, per the African Development Bank. ASEAN countries, caught between US and Chinese markets, see export growth stall at 3%, down from 8% in 2024. Even neutral players like Switzerland report a 6% drop in watch exports, a luxury trade casualty. The global supply chain, already strained by semiconductor shortages, faces new bottlenecks. Container shipping costs have risen 22%, per Drewry's World Container Index, inflating consumer prices worldwide. Allies face tough choices. The EU's capitulation to Trump's demands exposes cracks in transatlantic unity, while Canada and Mexico, bound by USMCA, grapple with 10% tariff threats on their exports. This trade war is a wildfire, scorching economies indiscriminately, with no nation immune. The United Nations estimates that 200 million people in developing nations could face increased poverty risks due to trade disruptions, a stark reminder that global conflicts spare no one. The trade war's human toll is heartbreaking. Families lose thousands, workers lose jobs. Even kids feel the despair, not just wallets. Behind the sterile statistics are human lives upended. American families face a relentless squeeze. Fresh produce costs 4% more. Electronics are hit by 12% price hikes, and new cars average $4,000 extra due to supply chain chaos. In Ohio, a single mother of two tells us, "I'm working 2 jobs, but the grocery bill keeps climbing. It's like the system's rigged." In China, migrant workers in export hubs like Shenzhen watch factories shutter, their dreams of a better life unraveling. A factory worker in Guangzhou shares, "We used to send money home. Now we're borrowing to survive. This trade war isn't just policy. It's a human tragedy, tearing at the fabric of communities on both sides of the Pacific. Hollywood's Wanda Sykes captures the despair, joking that Trump's leadership is like teaching a 70-year-old to control his emotions, a quip that resonates with parents like hers, whose kids felt sad after Trump's election, sensing a nation adrift. This is a rupture between leaders and the elite, where trust in governance feels like a relic. The regressive nature of tariffs hits hardest at the bottom. Low-income U.S. households spend 8% more of their income on tariff-affected goods, per the National Bureau of Economic Research. In China, Dan Wang notes that U.S. tariffs above 35% erase exporters' profits, diverting trade to Europe and ASEAN, leaving workers in the dust. The pain is universal but uneven. U.S. retirees on fixed incomes like those in Florida fear stock market swings, with the S&P 500 down 8% in Q1 2025. In China, rural families reliant on migrant workers' remittances face hunger, with 15% of Guangdong's workforce unemployed, per local reports. Small businesses suffer too. A Wisconsin electronics retailer reports a 20% sales drop, while a Shanghai textile firm lays off half its staff. The Brookings Institution warns that tariff-driven inflation could push 10 million Americans closer to poverty, while China's urban unemployment hits 6.2%, a 5-year high. Yet, amidst the hardship, resilience emerges. Community groups in the U.S. launch food drives, while Chinese workers form cooperatives to pivot to domestic markets. But these are band-aids on a gaping wound. The trade war's human cost, lost dreams, fractured families, eroded trust, demands more than rhetoric. It's a stark reminder that when nations clash, it's the vulnerable who bear the scars. International Monetary Fund sounds alarm on trade war's global damage. Global growth slashed to 2.8% in 2025. It's not just numbers. Recession odds are spiking. The International Monetary Fund has issued a stark warning. President Trump's tariffs, now at century-high levels, are dragging the global economy into a dangerous slowdown. On April 22, 2025, the IMF slashed its global growth forecast to 2.8% for 2025, down 0.5% from its January projection of 3.3%, citing the devastating impact of U.S. tariffs reaching 100-year highs. This isn't just a tweak, it's a significant economic shock, with the IMF warning that rising trade tensions could further erode growth, pushing the world toward a precarious edge. The U.S., the world's largest economy, faces a 1.8% growth forecast for 2025, a sharp drop from 2.8% in 2024, while China's growth is cut to 4%, down 0.6% from earlier projections. This is a crisis born of policy, not nature, and its ripples are felt worldwide. The IMF's chief economist, Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas, paints a grim picture. U.S. tariffs are not just hurting trade, they're sowing confusion and uncertainty, making it impossible for businesses to plan investments or source supplies efficiently. Bilateral trade between the U.S. and China, the world's two largest economies, is plummeting, dragging down global trade growth. The IMF warns that inflation will decline more slowly, hitting 4.3% in 2025 and 3.6% in 2026, with the U.S. facing 3% headline inflation, a full percentage point higher than January forecasts, driven by tariff costs and strong service sector demand. This isn't just an economic hiccup, it's a policy-induced storm, threatening to unravel decades of trade integration. The recession risk is climbing. The IMF now estimates a 37% chance of a U.S. downturn, up from 25%, a sobering shift that reflects policy uncertainty and trade disruptions. Kristalina Georgieva, IMF Managing Director, urges de-escalation, warning that sustained trade tensions could tip the global economy into a broader crisis. The Federal Reserve faces a delicate balancing act, needing to anchor inflation expectations amid public scars from the COVID-era price spikes. Gourinchas stresses that central bank independence is critical, especially as Trump's attacks on Fed Chair Jerome Powell fuel market jitters, contributing to steep stock market losses on April 21, 2025. The fallout extends beyond the U.S. and China. Canada and Mexico, key U.S. trading partners, see their growth forecasts slashed due to tariffs ranging from 10% to 25% on their goods. The euro area is projected to grow at a meager 0.8%, hamstrung by reduced U.S. demand. Modern supply chains, where goods cross borders multiple times, amplify the damage, creating multiplier effects akin to pandemic-era disruptions. The IMF's rapid revision, compiled in just 10 days after Trump's April 2nd tariff announcement, underscores the urgency of the crisis, as businesses globally cut spending amid uncertainty. This is a world economy on edge, where tariff wars threaten to erase years of progress. Gerinchas calls for restoring predictability to the global trading system, warning that without it, investment and innovation will stall. The IMF's forecasts don't yet account for Trump's 90-day tariff pause on some countries, but Gerinchas notes that overall tariff rates remain elevated and policy uncertainty hasn't eased. This is a high-stakes moment where the world's economic fate hinges on whether leaders can step back from the brink or plunge deeper into chaos. The US-China trade war is a clash of titans where neither side dares blink. Trump's 145% tariffs and Xi's 125% counter-tariffs imperil $650 billion in global trade, with inflation, recession fears, and geopolitical fault lines casting long shadows. Yet, faint hope glimmers. Trump's 90-day tariff pause for most countries and China's appointment of Li Changgang, a seasoned negotiator, hint at dialogue. The world watches, breathless, as economic Armageddon looms. This isn't just a trade war. It's a test of leadership, resilience, and the will to find common ground. Will Trump's bravado yield to pragmatism? Can Xi's patience pave a path to peace? The stakes are colossal, with the global economy hanging in the balance. Stay tuned as this saga unfolds, a defining chapter in the 21st century story. The question isn't just who wins, it's whether the world can afford the cost.